Real estate investing can bring big reward and big risks. So know your risks. Welcome to the Real Estate Risk Report, the show for real-world insight on real estate investment risk. Now, here's your host, Lance Pederson.
Thank you for joining the Real Estate Risk Report. I'm your host, as always, Lance Pederson. So today I have with me a good buddy of mine, James Marszalek. He's with Operation Red Dot, located up in the Tacoma area, Seattle-Tacoma area. How you doing, James?
Not bad, Lance. How about yourself, man?
Doing really, really good. Really, really good. So yeah, a bit of backstory with James. So James and I met, I guess it was probably earlier this year. He had reached out to me. He was in the process of entertaining, adding a new piece to his business with a very interesting asset strategy, which we're going to spend, pretty much the entire day, this episode covering. But him and I have kind of hit it off. Really like how James sort of approaches everything he does with sort of a fervor and a level of detail that's sort of unmatched as far as I'm concerned as to most people I meet. So really enjoy spending time with James, and I'm sure the rest of you will be big fans of James when we're done too. But James, why don't you share a little bit with us about how you got into real estate to begin with? I think you've got a kind of a great origin story and what ended up leading you to landing in Tacoma, Washington.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for that intro. It's definitely an honor to be here and an honor to be talking with you and the rest of the audience here. Let's see. So how I got into real estate. So I think real estate's always been an interesting thing to me. When I was 15, I read a book called The Millionaire Next Door. I'm sure a lot of us have read that book, but not a lot of people are reading financial books as teenagers. I didn't have a family that really talked about finance or investments or, anything like that. They were really rat race W-2 type people, which, nothing wrong with that, but I see a better way to do things. I see a better American dream. So when I graduated high school, I joined the Army and ended up doing 7 years in the Army, deployed to Iraq twice, logged I think over 625 combat missions all over Iraq. When I got out, this was right around 2011, 2012. I was looking for what to do next. I was a combat soldier, and that doesn't translate very well to the civilian space. And so, when you're leaving the military, they're like, all right, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? That kind of question. And I'm like, well, what does my skill set translate into? Intel gathering, putting 10,000 piece puzzles together. And they're like, well, you're a combat soldier. You can pretty much do security. or go be a cop, and I'm like, those were interesting to me. And so I checked them out, but it didn't take much due diligence to realize that wasn't the path I wanted to go down. I ultimately left the military because I wanted more control over the conversation of what was going on. The military has a lot of bureaucracy, and good ideas are not really incentivized to be executed. And that frustrated the crap out of me because I always kind of had this lean mindset mentality and wanted to make things better. I wanted to improve things. I wanted to make sure that we were using our time effectively. And the military didn't like that. If you weren't the general, then you weren't the one picking what we did or how we did it. And that just frustrated the living crap out of me. And so I ended up leaving. I don't regret any of my time in the military. It was an amazing experience. We got to do a lot of good things, and we protected freedom in a lot of different ways, over in the Middle East. And so all that was good. But when I got out of the military, I really started to dive into real estate. And I actually started as an investor. I got into flipping houses and scooping up rental properties. And overall, I did have a couple other jobs. I started a couple other businesses, but I was always doing real estate. I always had a project going. I had savings from the military. I was the one that everybody in the military would come to because they couldn't pay their rent because they just bought some new Camaro or some stupid big financial decision, that really put them behind. And they knew that I was investing in stocks and that I was taking my extra money and doing, wise investments with it. But I do want to say this one thing because I kick myself in the butt every day for this thought. Nobody told me while I was active duty that I could use my VA home loan to buy property with no money down, and not just houses, but duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are all fair game with the VA. And so, in the military, a lot of people don't know this, but you get a housing stipend in the military during your entire career, and it can range anywhere from $1,500 to $2,900 a month. And so I got that the entire time I was in the military, and I added up all that money. It's $136,000 that I gave to some other landlord because I didn't know that I could be pocketing that money. And so when I really realized that, I'm like, oh, crap, I need to go buy a house. And right after I got out of the military, that's when I discovered the mistake. And I'm like, oh, crap. Okay, well, now I can go execute it. And I bought my first house and ended up just selling that last year for a great profit, and it cash flowed amazingly. So I started out well. But ultimately, right around 2016, I really decided that I wanted to make real estate a full-time gig and build something unique. I saw that everybody and their mother was a real estate agent, and everybody knew a real estate agent. And so I knew I was coming into a fairly saturated market. How I got to Tacoma is kind of an interesting story. I ran a transport company out of Williston, North Dakota, in the Bakken oil fields. And I went over there and built a transport company. We were hauling 4 semi trucks and trailers worth of crude oil and dirty water off the drilling rigs. And then in right around 2015, the oil field crashed hard because of OPEC sticking their nose into things and price fixing. And there's a lot of different moving pieces there. But out of 1,200 drilling rigs in the Bakken oil field, in 4 months, we went down to 11. Which is a really big deal. And it just crashed really hard. I lost all my contracts, and I just said, you know what, we're going to liquidate and we're moving. And so I put 8 cities on the map. All of them were mostly West Coast, a couple in Oregon, most of them in Washington. And I was really looking for what's going to be the next step. And I knew real estate was going to be the next thing. And so I like to quantify everything. And so I put 15 different categories of what's going to be important. And then I gave them numerical values. I rated them, and Tacoma, Washington ranked so far above all the rest of them. It was kind of a no-brainer. So late 2000, it was actually June, July 2015, I moved to Tacoma, got my real estate license, and started building the infrastructure for what I have now, which is Operation Red Dot, which is a veteran and military-focused real estate company. And we've logged about 65 million in gross sales since we opened in mid 2016. And ultimately, it was really about building proof of concept. I wanted to really deeply discover the current need because I had been out of the military now for 4 or 5 years. I wanted to make sure that I was really deeply connected to what the military needed when it came to housing. And what I discovered was we're in the middle of a crisis. We're in the middle of a big problem where it's actually very hard for military people to get housing. And that led me to think about my housing, because I wasn't thinking about purchasing a house because I didn't know you could. And so I thought back to when I got to Fort Wainwright, Alaska, my first duty station. I was in a hotel for over 72 days. Wow. Because there was nothing available. Rentals were hard to come by. There was nothing available on post. And so I'm stuck in this hotel with a spouse, my dog, and only the stuff that I could fit on, in the car. And all the rest of the stuff was stuck in a storage facility because they won't deliver it till you have a permanent address. There were just a lot of problems. Yeah. And that really is amplified in a way that I can't even quantify right now. There are people who are staying in hotels and temporary housing for 6 to 8 months right now because not only is there nothing available on post, but our real estate market is on fire. I mean, it is a California wildfire. Yep. And so rentals are incredibly hard to come by for a lot of different reasons. But then they're like, well, let's just go use our VA loan. The education is a lot more now. So, people will say, well, let's just go buy, right? We have the benefit, we can go buy. But what they're finding is there's 30 offers on the houses that they want to pursue. There are people guaranteeing $40,000 to $50,000 in a low appraisal situation. And military people just can't compete with that. Yeah. So we've got less and less rental inventory coming on the market. A lot of it's being soaked up because landlords who bought in 2011, 12, 13, 14 are selling at the peak of the market. And those rental properties are being pulled out of the rental pool and being given to owner occupiers. So the rental game is very tough. And then they go over into the purchase end and it's even harder because they're competing with people that have cash, and they're basically making the decision for the seller pretty slam dunk. It's really hard to compete with those kind of offers. And so I started thinking to myself, and in general, I mean, just in Western Washington alone, there's 45,000 licensed agents. Jeez. That's a lot of noise going on right now. A lot of people chirping, hey, let me help you buy and sell a house. Let me help you buy and sell a house. And it's nothing but noise. Everybody's got the same product. Everybody is basically offering the same service of let me represent you in the sale or purchase of a home. And that really led me to think about how can we offer something that nobody else has.
Right.
And after 65 million in sales, I think we've got the proof of concept, and we really treat every single client as a focus group. And so we're really diving deep into what kind of product would have made this process easier for you? What kind of factors would have really benefited you in this kind of a situation? And we've been collecting that data for years. And we ultimately compiled that data and turned that into the hedge fund that we're really just getting ready to launch for the Red Dot Income Fund. And what we're doing with that money is really launching a product that allows military service members and veterans to come into housing as a tenant, but leave as an owner. And that ultimately, the legal part of it looks like a lease option or a rent with an option to purchase, as it's also called. And that works for a couple of different things. That works for people who are coming to a new duty station. I'm sure, as you know, military members are moving about every 3 years, every 3 to 4 years or so. So we have military families that are constantly in motion. Yeah. Now, there's two general schools of thought in the military, and that's just, I don't want to buy a house because I don't want to have to deal with it when I leave to the next location. And so we're just going to rent forever. And so, getting them into a rental property is really the key. They don't want to be in a hotel for a year. That's a really stressful way to live. Yeah. And so we've got a big mass of the population that really just needs housing over their head for them and their family. But there's also this secondary, really demographic that we've uncovered within the military demographic. And that's, we've got people, and I have clients that are like this as well, that we're on offer 15, 16, 17, 25. I had one we were on offer 28 the other day, and we finally got one under contract. Oof. And that's hard, right? That's a tough place to be when you're just getting slapped around and defeated. Every time you turn around, you're hearing that another opportunity didn't pan out. And meanwhile, you got to keep in mind, these guys they've got three main options. They can live on post, they can rent off post, or they can buy off post. And so typically they're pursuing all three of those options at the same time, which means they're constantly being told by the military housing office that, sorry, nothing's available yet. They're constantly putting in applications and dropping those $25 to $50 application fees for the rentals, only to be told that somebody else got it. And then every time they turn around, they're getting an offer rejected because there were 30 offers and one of them was cash, or one of them was putting $100,000 down, or one of them guaranteed $40,000 in a low appraisal. So every time they turn around, they're just being told that another opportunity didn't pan out. So we saw this as an opportunity to stand in front of that problem and say, hey, instead of you trying to use your resources and your credit and your everything to try and get into this house, why don't you let us stand in front of you with cash and be competitive to beat out these other offers to get you into the house? And then we're going to give you that flexibility and the option to say, look, after 90 days, if you want to use your pre-approval letter from your VA mortgage lender to buy it, we're going to preset a flat rate price so you can get into that house. And guess what? There's no competition. There's no tours. You already live in the house, right? So it's nice and simple. So whether or not they want to rent or they actually do want to purchase, which, look, the VA home loan market is just in 2020, it's a $375 trillion market. There are a lot of military people, both veterans and active duty, that are exercising that benefit to buy houses. And so that's a super big market. So we have proof of concept that says we have a lot of military people that are actually executing that right to purchase. Yeah. And so there are just a lot of people who are frustrated with this hot market and they don't want to compete anymore. And so we're literally offering them a tunnel almost into the house that they want to live in. So not only are we solving this military housing crisis problem, but we also wanted to make sure that this was really incentivized and beneficial for our investors as well. And I think we do that in a lot of different ways. Number one, we offer monthly income. There's not a lot of hedge fund opportunities out there that are really monthly, monthly dividend type income. And so we really structured in that way. And of course, as we've talked about before, we're also super friendly with self-directed 401ks and IRAs, which is also not something that I see a lot in the investor space as well. And so we're really, we came to the table with the mission of, yes, we need to solve this military housing problem, but how can we also solve the investor problem? It's really hard to find good deals right now. And really, when we talk about total risk adjusted returns, I can't imagine a better asset class than income producing Class A real estate. That's hard to beat right there. Yep. But also our demographic is they have guaranteed contractual income and contractual guaranteed housing allowances, which is a pretty big deal. So when we get a military client that comes into one of our properties, they're not paying us rent. The government is paying us rent directly. And that really does lower that total risk. Yeah, and so not that there's no risk, there's always some risk. And we do a pretty good job of identifying what those risks are. And then we just build systems around to really make sure that when a risk does hit our radar, that we've already thought about it and we already have the tools necessary to kind of work around those.
Yeah. When you think about it too, with the pandemic, I mean, that's been a big issue for people is they lost their jobs and they're not paying rent. Overall, multifamily as an example seems to be holding up pretty well in most areas. But yeah, I mean, I think that's just it, is that, tenant quality, is a big deal in no matter what, right? Like who is the one that's going to be, paying this rent that on this lease. And so having the fact that they've got a housing allowance, doesn't hurt. Not to mention that in areas like SeaTac, where there really isn't enough housing, as you said. I mean, and this isn't just SeaTac. I mean, it's happening all over the country where there's just not enough housing, especially for, it's a big problem. And it's even worse with these military installations, given that, because much what you said about this pain of like, okay, you've been, reassigned to this other station. So a lot of what you said, isn't that happening remote? Like they're literally on the other side of the country trying to deal with this. Right.
Yeah. And that's something that we really strive for, because this is a mindset thing. So military people typically get orders about 45 to 60 days in advance of the actual move. And what ends up happening is they're clearing that current military installation. Let's say it's maybe Fort Bragg, North Carolina. They're clearing that base on the day that they're supposed to leave. They're getting the signatures from all the different departments of the U.S. Army or whatever branch that they're a part of. And then they're getting to the new base, and then they're starting that housing conversation. And so, because what they're doing is they're walking into the housing office going, okay, we're here. Where's our key? Right? Where's our house? And the housing office just kind of goes, that's adorable. It's a 9-month wait. Like, it doesn't work like that. And of course, when we talk about inventory, I'm really big on the data. I think the data tells a story. Mm-hmm. And when we had the crash back in 2008, we had 11 times the inventory that we have now. Think about that. 11 times the inventory. So in a normal balanced real estate market, which is how we gauge that is what's called months of inventory. How many months of inventory do we have? And if we stop taking listings today, how long could the market survive before we literally have 0 houses available anymore? In a balanced market, we have about 6 months worth of inventory. That's the idea. Today, I actually just checked it right before this podcast. In the county that we operate for Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is the second biggest military installation in the country, we have 0.62 months worth of inventory. 0.62 months. It's nothing. And that's why you're seeing your average days on market in the 1 to 2 range, and your price listed versus price sold being between 104 and 110%. Because we've got all these people that are going 40 to 100,000 in some cases over the asking price, and they're guaranteeing that difference. And so it's actually selling for those prices.
So what do you think that the impact? I mean, and I guess you probably know this because you're super active in the market. But cash buyers, how much power does a cash buyer have?
Almost none. Almost none. And I'll say this. Because I spent a lot of time working with a company called Home Partners of America, which is a similar type of lease option program open to the public. I was a top producer in that organization, and they lost more offers because they weren't willing to make the rest of the terms competitive. In a normal market, cash buyers have a lot of weight because there's no appraisal and they can offer whatever they can offer. And it's just perceived to be a very quick close. We have less logistics to deal with in a cash offer. But in a really tight market, buyers are getting really competitive on the rest of the other terms, and they should. They're either waiving inspections or doing info-only inspections. They're releasing part or all of the earnest money deposit out the gate. They're guaranteeing low appraisals. So they're doing all these, and especially like quick closes, or they're just overall, they're just waiving contingencies. Mm-hmm. And in some cases that risk is reckless. And I'm never going to recommend in some cases, like, okay, we're looking at a house that was built in 1972 and it looks like it was built in 1972. We shouldn't be waiving that inspection. That's an unnecessary risk. Yeah. Now, if we're looking at a house that was built in 2018 and it looks like it was built in 2018, feel a little bit more comfortable about that, right? Sure. And this is one of the big reasons why we really focus our attention on Class A real estate. I'm not looking for flip houses. I'm not looking for houses that have deferred maintenance. I want stuff that has high resale value. And I ultimately want to buy houses that my military clients are going to be like, we want to buy this house, right? Mm-hmm. It's got a modern floor plan, modern appliances. It's in good locations, close to base. All that kind of different stuff matters. And so, cash means nothing if the rest of the terms are no good. So going back to the Home Partners of America deal, they required a 10-day inspection period. To a seller who's looking at 20 other offers that are waiving inspection, your cash offer doesn't mean anything. It just doesn't mean anything.
So isn't that going to be, so it seems to me that with you guys, as you roll this out, then the fact there's only 0.62 months of inventory on the market, that what are you going to do? I mean, you're still going to, now you're going to get turned down. Like, so how are you going to, what are you going to do to be more competitive so that you can win, so that you can actually get in once again, without overpaying for stuff?
It's a super good question. And ultimately, we're working, so the veterans are not paying any option fee up front, which is very normal for an option where you have some kind of consideration that's paid up front. But the VA allows us to roll that option fee into the loan. And so there's a lot of different ways that, yes, overpaying is something that we're very conscious about, and we have threshold limits that we have to play with. But I can be ultra competitive on the rest of the terms because I know I'm going to buy that house. I already know that it's Class A real estate. And in a lot of cases, I'm having the inspection done after the fact, given certain parameters, right? So I can play very competitively in that space. But where I excel, where others don't, is we have a marketing campaign. So I'm sure you've heard of all these different companies that say, we pay cash for houses, right? Yeah. It's a very common wholesale technique. Yeah. You see the bandit signs on the side of the road, we buy houses cash, any condition. Those guys are looking for equity in the deal. And I've flipped houses. I years ago, I put out those bandit signs. So I played the game. But we're coming with a different approach this time. And so we can go look for off-market opportunities because there are people out there that are, at any given time, there's that light bulb moment that a couple says, hey, why don't we sell the house? Or maybe they got a new job in a different location. So we're really actively looking for when that light bulb goes off for those people. We want to be in the right place at the right time. And without diving too deep into it, because I could spend 10 hours talking about our marketing stack and how we get in front of these people. But ultimately, we're getting in front of these people when that light bulb goes off, saying, hey, I am willing to pay a market value price for your house and cash. And so that's a completely different approach than what most people are doing when they're looking for flip opportunities. And so it's a different type of approach. And so, yes, the inventory is really light right now. And it is expected to rise. And of course, a big reason why we're having this problem does have to do with COVID. It does have to do with the pandemic and what's going on around that. And, a big piece of this is the foreclosure ban and the eviction ban. I'm following a lot of this news pretty closely, and there's a lot of legislation that is so anti-landlord I've never seen anything like it before. And so you are, once the federal and state eviction and foreclosure bans lift, we are going to see a flood come into the market. I have no question of that. And look, we're due for a market correction. When you look at the last 60 years worth of real estate data, we're correcting every 7 to 11 years on average, and almost pretty predictably, right? And when was the last time that we had a major correction? Of course, this was more designated as a crash, but it was '08. Yeah. So we're right in the window for a correction anyway. And I think the pandemic has really pushed that out. And we're restricted now on foreclosures and evictions. And so we've got people like, especially in Seattle, you will never, ever see me buy anything in the city of Seattle because it's so pro-tenant and so anti-landlord. I don't know why anybody would want non-owner occupied property there. But that's one example where you've got a significant portion of tenants that haven't paid rent since March 2020. And even if they're working, just because they know that they can get away with it. Yeah. And so you're going to have a massive rush of properties that are going to hit the market as soon as this lifts. Now, nobody knows exactly when, but it is going to happen. And so we're really laying the infrastructure. And the fact is, yes, it's possible that we may go pursue a property and we don't get it. But I think percentage-wise, as a ratio, we're going to win more offers than we lose for sure. And it's just because of, I know, I write 300-400 offers a year. I know exactly what the sellers are looking for because I also represent these sellers, right? And again, when we talk about focus groups, normal real estate agents, they're looking for the transaction, right? They treat their whole job as transactional. They watch a lot of HGTV and they're like, oh, I can do house hunters, right? Yeah. And so you've got a lot of these guys who aren't treating this like a business. And so when we have a client, we're treating them as a focus group and we're really digging deep into what is important to you. And then we're compiling that data on a larger basis so we can see the trends that come from that. And then we write our offers based on the data that we get. This really gets deep into like a Ray Dalio approach of we want to turn the data that we're receiving into an algorithm that helps us make decisions alongside whoever the chief investment officer is at the time, which right now it's me. But, it's that we really want to be using a data-driven approach. And that does put us ahead of the other competitors in this market because they aren't concerned about a data-driven approach. They're just like, okay, we've got this client. They want to buy that house. We're going to write the offer the best we can. And if we lose it, we'll just move on to the next one. And they don't learn anything from that experience, where from day one, we've been logging and getting data on a very deep level from every single client that we've had. And we use that to make our decisions on a daily basis. Really good question.
Yeah. And I think that it does seem that, real estate's a local business. The advantage, because you think about, okay, we like the whole strategy makes sense, but from someone on the outside that's trying to do this, one of the, especially in a super competitive market like it is now, like you said, one way or another, that's going to recede to some degree, right? It's not, this is sort of, it's a bit of an outlier to be this tight on the inventory, but just, it's all the relationships in the community that you have, right? So you're having the ability to, like you said, being more strategic about going out, because it's kind of, I don't know if in Tacoma that they have, or any of the big iBuyers active in Tacoma.
Sure. Yeah. They're not winning a lot of offers. I'll tell you that. Like, they're here, but the percentage of deals that they're actually getting are quite low.
So they're struggling.
Oh,
And what do you chalk that up to? Once again, it's just not appreciating terms, and because this is just it, right? Like, what if they're not successful, what will make you guys, I know you kind of already covered that, but like, what is it that they're not doing that you can kind of see them attempting to do that's just
they're not competing with the actual market? iBuyers require I view iBuyer programs just like wholesalers. They need a pocket of equity for their numbers to pencil out. Yeah. And if they can't get that, then they can't buy the house. So they have a maximum allowable offer that is far below what the market is actually willing to bear. Ultimately, market value is defined as what a buyer is willing to spend. Now, when we talk about the actual appraisal definition, it requires a little deeper, due diligence into that. But that's really what it gets boiled down to. And so if you've got 15 buyers that are willing to pay $20,000 above what your maximum allowable offer is, the iBuyers are not going to get that property.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in your guys' case, I guess the you buy the option fee. I mean, if the market goes down, I mean, that could become an issue where they now are going to have to come out of pocket with cash to potentially close. Worst case scenario is that it just stays as a rental in your pool.
That's right.
And you live to fight another day. I mean, I guess it's just that you have to look at it. So markets, like always in real estate, matter.
Right.
So Tacoma, like you said, it's the largest military installation in the U.S. So you've got that, and it's in a market that is constrained, independent of these sort of the pandemic or whatever.
Right.
It was already too light on housing. More people want to move in to that area than there's not enough housing. It's a housing shortage.
Well, Washington in general, out of all the 50 states across the U.S., has the biggest influence of corporate America that's represented here. We have some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies that are all housed within an hour driving distance of where I live right now. Right. And in this Tacoma area. And so let's think about the dual income software developer that works for Amazon. They're both getting 6-figure incomes. And they don't want to spend $900,000 on a 1-bed, 1-bath to be close to work. So what is the alternative? They're going to drive an hour outside of where they work, and they're going to commute, but they're going to save $500,000 on housing. That makes sense. And again, these are the people who have cash. And so that's really what's driving it. But the legislation in Washington right now, good old Governor Inslee, is really making it tough for companies like Boeing and Amazon to want to stay in Seattle. And we've already seen Boeing uplift 2 of their massive facilities and move down to North Carolina. And Amazon moved out of the city of Seattle as well. They're moving over to Bellevue. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of those corporate influences move. I mean, we're saying California is seeing the same thing right now, right? A lot of Tesla moving away from California. And I know Joe Rogan's not a company, but Joe Rogan moving away from California. We've got a massive exodus of people that are leaving areas that are no longer beneficial to their situation. And so I think a lot of the demand is coming from those people who are pouring into these markets because that's where the work is, right? That's where these large jobs are. The problem is, especially because of the pandemic, like Salesforce just announced, Salesforce is a massive company and they just went full remote.
Yeah.
So if you're remote now, do you have to live in an area where a 1-bed, 1-bath costs $900,000?
No.
The answer is no. Yeah. That means you can go anywhere that you want. And so now the outliers, now that a lot of these large Fortune 500 companies are looking at remote as optional or possibly mandatory, which I think is smart. We're full remote and love it. We have a really great remote culture, and we've done a lot of due diligence into how to build communication. How do we build accountability? That's a big piece of this conversation. So again, as this whole situation kind of unfolds, and there's 15 or 20 major factors that are driving kind of the direction that we're headed here. I think as this unfolds, I see us kind of loosening that grip a little bit, on how crazy this is. And look, I build business especially in real estate, I build business to be profitable in the up and the down.
Yeah.
Because that's what the market does, right? If you're not prepared and having that conversation, I'd argue you don't have a business, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's too part of once again, the military, I'm from Minot, North Dakota. You talked about
right.
And we've got an Air Force base. Right. And in that base in particular is very strategic to this country.
That's right.
Right. The B-52s fly out of there, and we've got the ICMBs and
the missile silos.
Silos, and it's strategic. But it's a small town. But when you have these bases, they have like Joint Base Lewis McChord. I mean, they're their own. They're like their own. They pull everything. Their own gravitational force.
So that's a super good point. And I call it utopia, right? They're military utopic environments. And, not that they're completely insulated from economic downturns and other forces, but for the most part, when you've got there's over 45,000 active duty service members on Joint Base Lewis McChord that all have guaranteed income. So let's talk about furniture stores, department stores, restaurants. If you're inside of that military zone, which is typically about a 45-minute drive from the main base, your business is somewhat insulated, not 100%, but you're going to have higher spending than you would in, Boise, Idaho. right? Or Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, or maybe even Spokane, places like that where it's not going to be quite as insulated because you don't have that benefit of having people who have guaranteed income that are spending in your market, right?
Yeah. So you guys have really ran this, and I mean, obviously you were using the other program. I mean, so This is sort of like, you already have product market fit, problem solution fit, obviously all of the dynamics that we just discussed about military installations, the Seattle, Tacoma area in general. I mean, it's a perfect place. I mean, as you said, you moved there for a reason.
That's right.
So it has so much going for it. So how about the expansion plan of sort of Red Dot? I mean, what are the other areas in the country or bases? I'm obviously familiar with, my Air Force Base and Grand Forks Air Force Base and those things. And I know that like San Antonio's got a pretty big, military following, a couple of bases down there, I think, right? But are there others that you see as sort of the next frontier or expansion for you guys?
Probably one of my favorite questions and things to talk about here, because now we're talking about really a prioritized strategy of how we would expand this program to all, because that's really the goal, right? I don't just want to help military people at one. I mean, there are 440 military installations. Not all of them make sense to set up shop at, right? Yeah. Some of them, let's think about Fort Knox, Kentucky. That's a great example. Fort Knox is it is one of the top 25 biggest bases in the US, but it's a basic training base. So the people who reside there can't rent off post. They can't even leave the post, right? Yeah. And the drill sergeants and the people who run those programs, those are really considered temporary duty stations. You're there for a year, maybe two. And you're given housing on base. Like the only people that live there are the people that work there. And so they do have the capability. So I wouldn't deploy capital in Fort Knox, Kentucky, even though it's a fairly large base and they've got a lot of people, because it's not our demographic. It wouldn't make sense to deploy capital there. And so what we do is we're looking at a variety of different things. And so I've got about 50 bases that are on my radar that really do pass the due diligence test of it would make sense to expand into these areas. And through this research, we actually found something very interesting, which I kind of had a sense of while I was active duty, but it wasn't until I really did the deep level due diligence into these military installations that I really found that the military is placed clusters. And so I really call them cluster bases. Mm-hmm. Washington, D.C. is a perfect example. And so we have 5 major branches of the military: Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard.
Space Force.
What's that? Yeah, and Space Force now. Yeah, thank you. You're totally right on that. I totally want to deal with housing on the moon. That's going to be our next thing, but we'll talk about that in another episode. But when I think about what bases I want to move to next, we have about 9 locations across the U.S. that are the most strategic, because we have multiple branches of the military that are strategically located in a very tight area. And so within about a 60-minute drive of each other. And DC, again, the best example of this, where we have pretty much every single base represented in a really tight, narrow area. So where this program really gets headway is by becoming a household name in military housing, right? I'm not here to just help with housing. I want to revolutionize the way that the military gets housing and putting them into a position where they can start building equity, right? Operation Red Dot was built on the idea that we want to advocate for real estate ownership. This is not just about putting a roof over your head. And so we have investor conversations with all of our clients because the government is literally paying them to be real estate investors, but they don't think about it like that. Right. Wow. If the government was paying you $2,000 a month to have a house and you could be putting that into equity over 10, 15, 20 years, those numbers add up really quick. Right. And again, back to my $136,000 that I just basically lit on fire and threw out the window. Oh, I hate and love talking about that all at the same time because it's such a powerful story. A lot wasted there. Can I share a map real quick?
Yeah, go for it. For those who are listening on audio, we're gonna do a little visual. So you'll have to check out the YouTube.
All right, so I'll kind of define this as best I can. But this map shows where we're currently at, and then it shows really these orange dots are our cluster locations. So we've got Vegas, Colorado, San Diego, Texas is not really a cluster, but there's just so many bases in Texas that I had to include it in this. North Carolina, Jacksonville, Florida, Norfolk, DC, Maryland, Philadelphia. These are our cluster cities. And so what this represents is a whole bunch of military installations. They're all within a super tight area. And so when I think about what areas I want to move into, I want to move into the areas that have the biggest bang for the buck, and that we're getting the biggest brand awareness in across all of the different military installations across the US. And of course, you can see the blue dots really represent the singular bases that are still very strategic. They're still really big bases. And again, we're really looking at the demographic. Is it a fighter jet base? Is it a Stryker Army base? Is it a basic training base? Like, all these things matter. It's not just about how many people are there, but it's also about what is the population in a 50-mile radius outside of that base? What are the days on market? What are the price per square foot? What's the price listed versus price sold? All these different real estate data points matter for what drives my interest and what informs my decision on where I want to move next. But I really wanted to show this because it really outlines kind of what the future of the fund looks like. And not just that, because ultimately, here, I'll take this down. You know, what this fund represents is just another vertical in the Operation Red Dot conglomerate, right? Operation Red Dot Real Estate is an S corp that is built for the purchase and sale of real estate, ultimately. But then we also have Red Dot Property Management, which is not just for the hedge fund houses that we build or buy, but it's also, we seek other clients. We have a lot of military clients who will buy a house at Joint Base Lewis McChord. They'll get orders to go to some other duty station. They'll call me up and say, hey, I bought this house 3 years ago from you. I don't want to sell it. I want the passive income that comes from that. Because again, we're planting that investor seed very early in the conversation. We want them to build a portfolio, so when they leave the military, they've got a bunch of passive income coming in and they've got equity. So that puts them in a very good position to leave the military. And instead of saying, oh crap, the military is not giving me a housing allowance anymore, they're not paying for my insurance, my food, my anything anymore, I got to go get a job, right? And so they're forced to have a conversation about, what do I have to do to make sure that there's food on the table for my family, where they could be having a conversation around, what passions do I want to pursue? Do I want to build a business? Do I want to go pursue education so I can go get into a job that I really want? We had a client who just got out of the military and went to school so he could go work for SpaceX because that was his dream. And he's doing it. And he's doing it because that's what he did. He built passive income while he was active duty in the military. So he did the full 20 years. So he's got disability, he's got retirement, and he's got passive income. So he's what I would call financially, maybe not financially free, but definitely financially neutral, where if he never worked another day in his life, he's good. His family's good, right? They can put food on the table, their housing is covered, and all that kind of different stuff. But what it does is it really positions these people for a better life, right? And we're showing them that roadmap and what that looks like very early in the conversation. And I think it interests everybody. It's kind of a no-brainer. You mean the government's going to pay me to be a real estate investor? I don't see why I shouldn't get into that, right? And so, that's just one more incentivization for how we're letting these people exercise their right to purchase in the lease option program, because the lease option program really is the top of the funnel for this conversation. Let's get you into a house so we can start this conversation. We can start, paying that debt down while you get to take that appreciation. Meanwhile, our investors are getting cash flow and we're getting the option fees that come from that program.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what that's why I love the strategy, right? Well, one, because it's very, very strategic. And now you're a very strategic person. That's why I love hanging out with you, because you're always like 6 steps ahead, and it's awesome. Right. But the cool thing though, is that obviously it's your passion. So you have great passion about it. It really does solve a very big problem, right? Yeah. Because that is what makes being in the military really hard at times. Yeah. Is being kind of that homeless itinerant sort of thing that affects people. Right. We've all met the military brats that just get shuttled around, it changes them. So to soften that sort of trauma, right, is a big deal, and to make it more easy to sort of make those transitions. And then, as you're saying, being able to have then be front and center to begin, to have the conversation that no one had with you early on, which I'm assuming, many don't have. Now there's much more resources like active duty passive income podcasts. I mean, there's the military is rising up in this real estate investing realm. Yeah. And it's really neat to see because, military people like yourself are very community oriented and, realize it's a team sport, that kind of stuff. But then to get them, into it. And then, like you said, then to solve this problem that we have that's really bad right now on the investor side is that it's hard to find yield, especially on a good risk adjusted basis, consistent sort of income. But then that velocity of getting them to exercise and take advantage of their VA loan sooner rather than later, which I think, if I've heard you right in the past, is that with that other program that you were part of, they really they weren't doing anything to really push them to exercise to purchase. So they ended up just being rentals for forever, which isn't necessarily the end of the world. Sure. But in your case, it's just movement and liquidity and velocity of turn of assets. It mitigates risk. Right. And it just, that's what you want to see, that portfolio not necessarily stagnating, but really being active. Not to mention then you can recycle the funds and there's all sorts of benefits for everybody. So it's really neat to see how it's coming together.
I would argue that the company that I worked with before, like the way you said it made it seem awfully passive. Like they were just sitting back and they're saying whatever happens, happens. But I would argue they actually took action against the option to purchase. And I'll give you one example of how they did this. And when I saw this happen, like I got an email from these guys that I'm CC'd on all communication to the tenant. And so they send this email. And so they're not in the house yet. We're just getting ready to write the offer, which they have to authorize. And they send this email to the tenant. This was just last year. And I no longer work with these guys. I can't condone their broken process anymore. And so I just stopped working with them altogether. But this was one of the final nails in the coffin where they send the tenant an email. Now, this is in Washington, keep in mind, the Pacific Northwest, where we are rain about 8 months out of the year, right? Mm-hmm. So there's really no need for air conditioning. About 20% or less houses in Washington state have AC. Mm. Western Washington, Spokane's a whole different story. But so they send this email and they say, hey, in order for us to write this offer, because it's over a certain threshold of price, which was $400K, which right now the average purchase price in our county is $450. So they're saying we're forcing you, because your house that you want to rent is over a certain price point, we're forcing you, because the house doesn't have AC, we're going to charge you $9,000 in your option to purchase price to put AC into the house. And it's mandatory. So the tenant's like, we don't need AC. And I'm going over here like, AC, are you freaking kidding me? So I called him on it. And I'm like, guys, you've got to be kidding me right now. This is not like, why would I ever promote that? Like, nobody needs AC. We might use AC 2 days out of the year here, right? That's like saying we need heaters in Mexico. Like, get out of here. It doesn't make any sense. And they're like, well, this is just our new protocol. I went, I see. Yeah. And that was really, there were just so many things like that. That's like, who is so disconnected from the real estate market making decisions at the high level over here that you think this is a good idea? And they're like, this is just the rules. Yeah. I'm like, check. I got you. Okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're, but that is what happens. And, when you get underneath that, where the capital's coming from and how those things, it's it's Wall Street.
Yes.
It is. It's just disconnected from reality.
They're not trying to solve a problem. No. They're trying to boost profits. And look, I'm, as an entrepreneur and a business person, profits matter, right? Profits absolutely matter. But when you're putting profits over your consumer and you're actually putting your consumer at a disadvantage, I have a real ethical problem with that, problem. And of course, I'm a little biased because I am a vet. I did go to combat. I have lost brothers and sisters in war. And so, yes, that demographic is very close to me. And there is a serious crisis that's going on right now that I think we can have an impact on. And so, that was really one of the big reasons why I wanted to bring investors into it in this way, because not only is there a financial gain to be had and a low risk adjusted return, but I think a lot of people out there are going to look at this problem when I really showcase it and they're going to, wow, I didn't know it was that bad. Mm-hmm. Let's support our military. A lot of people say that, right? They'll post on their social medias, let's support our military. I'm ready to put my money where my mouth is. And I think there's a lot of investors out there that feel the same, that say, look, if we can help solve this problem, we talk about, these guys living in hotels for 9 months. My goal is that I have a house secured for them before they even leave their other duty station. Yeah. I want to be standing at the front door with a big celebratory banner that says welcome home. And I'm holding their key to their new house, whether they bought it or rented it. It doesn't matter, right? I want to eliminate, the military doesn't do a lot of things well. And housing is just one of them. Housing is just one of those things that they have broken, and they've privatized it. And believe me, Operation Red Dot is very seriously considering getting into the government contracting space so we can own that government housing contract and just run the whole game.
Yeah.
And there's no reason not. Ask anybody who's active duty military if they think their housing office on base is doing a good job, because it's not the federal government running that program. It's a privatized company, and none of those people are veterans. And none of those people really care. They all earn 1-star reviews, and all the ones I dealt with were the same way. And so it's like, what if somebody went in there that actually had incentivization or an ethical belief that we should be catering to the military, that we should actually be building programs around them that help them do what they need to do? Because these are the guys that are going off overseas, serving our country and putting their life on the line, while their families are back here in the States having to deal with not having their service member home, right? I just think we can do better.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I love what you're doing, brother. I mean, it's awesome. It's really awesome. Where can people find you, James?
Oh man. You can definitely find out more info about Red Dot at operationreddot.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. I would love to connect with anybody who wants to chat about this. I could talk real estate all day. I tell people I eat, sleep, and breathe real estate 24 hours a day. You want to message me at 2:00 in the morning, you're probly going to get a response.
And I can confirm that. That
right.
Is you are hardcore, and that's what I love about you.
Look, I treat business in general, not just real estate, especially real estate, but I treat business and being an entrepreneur like it's a war. I don't think there's any difference except for the fact that it's a different mission, right? We in a war, right? In combat, we have an area of operation. We have a set amount of resources. We have friendly forces and an enemy or competition, and we have a mission. And so when I left the military, I really did take a lot of the combat theory, the psychological warfare, and all the tools that I have millions of dollars in training from the federal government on how to be a warrior, right? How to really accomplish the mission. And I take a lot of that to real estate. I take a lot of that to business. And I believe in applying combat theory to real estate. And when you're on a mission, you treat it like you're outside the wire. Like this is, and we're not in a life and death situation here, right? Which is a good thing. Believe me, the fact that bullets aren't flying over my head right now, I'm okay with, right?
Yeah, that's
not
right.
a bad thing at all.
Yeah, that's right. It's a comfy environment to be doing for the new version of warfare. You've already lived through that. So you made it.
There's so many people that come into this industry. Like I said, I call them the HGTV agents, and there's just a vast majority of them that are just here to close deals. They're just here to do transactions and then move on to the next client. But I'm treating the expansion of what we're doing here like it's a war. And that does give me a strategic advantage over this market that allows me to capture more market share because I'm looking at this from a different perspective. I'm thinking about this from a guerrilla war mentality. Yeah. And that means I can attack massive companies like Keller Williams and Century 21. And, at all these different massive companies, I view them like blimps. They can't dart in and out of opportunities like I can. And so this is my passion. There's just no question. And I'm here to take the market share. That's the end of the game.
Yeah. I love it. And I love supporting you. So, all right, James, appreciate it. We'll be in touch. Thanks so much.
Love it, man.
See ya.
See ya.